In the Florida Today newsroom, I'm Matt Reed. Well, plenty of women in Brevard dream of launching their own businesses, and some take the plunge with the help from my guest today. Beth Gitlin is director of the Women's Business Center at the Florida Institute of Technology in Melbourne. A former international marketing consultant, Gitlin and the center offer education, networking, and other support for women trying to make their business ideas a reality. Turns out, women face some challenges that men don't. Here's my interview with Beth Gitlin. Beth, give me a sense of what the Women's Business Center does.
Well, we're a community-based organization housed at Florida Tech, and what we do is we provide 4 different services for women in the community that are not only starting businesses but growing their businesses. And so we do mentoring programs. We have mentoring programs. We do one-on-one business counseling. We provide business education courses and networking opportunities for women and men in the area to help them start and grow their businesses.
What kind of businesses have you seen? I mean,
I've seen the full gamut of businesses. It's amazing. I mean, typical small box retailers will come in, people that want to start a retail store. Just the other day, it was funny. We had someone that had a retail store downtown, and they ended up losing their lease, and they turned their business into a fashion truck. And you know, you've heard about the food trucks in the area. So now she actually runs her business out of a fashion truck, and that's a new type of business model that's actually taking off in a lot of the metropolitan areas, and she's trying to start that in Melbourne. But we also have internet-based businesses, consulting businesses, tech businesses, everything you can imagine, you name it. I've had them come in. It's been a wonderful experience to learn about all these different types. Healthcare is another one that's a big deal right now that people are getting into.
Is there a profile, do you think, of a typical woman entrepreneur in Brevard County?
Well, the profile that we're attracting, interestingly, is I think demographic-wise is between probably 40 and 60 years old. And some of them, most of them I notice are coming from the corporate environment. And so I can only give you, you know, some stories about it, and I don't have the hard data to really talk about it, but that's what seems is we're attracting. And so one of the things that I'm concerned about that I'd like to attract more of is the younger women entrepreneurs. And I think we actually have to start with that in college. And we have a program, the College of Business does, that is actually focusing on, you know, college-age kids and entrepreneurship. But I'd like to attract more of the younger crowd. But it really is those that are probably either stepping out of corporate America because they feel like there's no room for promotion for them.
Right.
And they need to create something for themselves, or sometimes maybe they're trying to get back into the business environment after having taken some time off. There's so much flexibility going on now with women and men in what they can do business-wise, and then the opportunities from a technological standpoint where, you know, if you have the website and you have a laptop, you can pretty much do business from anywhere nowadays.
You know what I've noticed is that in today's corporate environment, people do the work that maybe 2 or 3 other people used to do as recently as 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I hear people from time to time say, I'm working so hard, I'm not getting any ownership out of this or any stake out of this. If I'm going to work this hard, maybe I ought to go out on my own and try that idea that I have always been thinking about pursuing, but just never really had a chance to do it.
I have to tell you, in my personal experience, that's kind of what happened with me. And it wasn't so much that I had this great idea of, you know, a product, but I had the experience of the services that I provided, where I did import and export consulting work, or I did that for corporations. And I got to a point where I felt like I was experienced enough that I could provide this service on my own with a team of people to work on it. And I could set the types of ethics and standards that I wanted to do in my business, and also the amount of money that I wanted to make, rather than someone telling me this is the salary that you're going to make and you have to work by our ethics and standards. And that was really a motivating factor for me, that I could decide who I wanted to work with business-wise. That helped me move from that area. But I think a lot of other people feel the same way too. You
write a column occasionally for Florida Today, and one of them you urged people to think more about the outcomes that their businesses have as opposed to the activities that they do. It seemed like a very fundamental lesson. Would you elaborate on that a little bit?
It is pretty fundamental, but people have a hard time of stepping outside of themselves and looking outwardly into their business. And what I mean by that is I go to so many networking events, and I did this myself, where you ask someone, well, what do you do? And I think I just did it with you actually, because you said, what does the Women's Business Center do? And automatically I said, we provide mentoring and business education and that kind of thing. But does that really interest you, or does it interest you to learn that, well, I can help you increase your revenues, or I can help you gain additional customers, and I can help you in leadership development? That's the outcome that I'm talking about. And so many businesses aren't focused on the outcomes that they provide to their clients. And when they go and talk to their clients, they say, well, I can do this and I can do that, and I've won this award and I've won that award.
And you can pay me.
Yeah, and the clients don't understand, because it's not from their point of view, what is in it for them.
Help them measure the value to them, right?
Yes.
I mean, what am I getting out of it if I hire you?
And it's interesting, because logically you know that you're supposed to be saying those things, but realistically when you go out there and you start networking with people, it's really hard to step out of yourself and put yourself in their shoes. What is it that they would want to get out of it? So that's where like business coaches come in and having mentors. And I just actually did a proposal for someone yesterday on something, and I had another person take a look at what I had written, and she found 2 or 3 things that she said, well, I would say this and I would say that from a more general perspective of what that person was looking for. And I had actually put some wording in that was really from my viewpoint. And it just helps to have someone else take another look at it and give a different perspective.
That's a good idea. And I might come back to that difference between sort of a corporate outlook and an entrepreneurial outlook, whereas in the corporate world, somebody asks you what you do, well, here's what I own. Yeah. Here's what's in my department. This is what we do. We do these parts, and here's who I am. This is my status. Whereas if you're an entrepreneur and every minute counts, you need to be selling yourself. You need to be making sure that people know what they can get from you if they want you, or recommend you to somebody else. It's tougher, though.
Yeah. Speaking of coming from the corporate world, another thing that we have an issue with some of our clients is having them step out of thinking like an employee and thinking more as a business owner. So when they actually, this especially happens in the consulting businesses, where they're working and working and they're working hard, and they're only getting money for the time that they're spent into it, they've put into it. So it's kind of like, I'm working 40 hours a week, I'm making this much money, and that's all I can do because that's all I have, time to do it. Whereas thinking about what other ways that they can bring in revenues, whether it's speaking engagements or writing books, or, there's a difference between money for time and money for knowledge. And it's really interesting to see people grow from that employee mentality to, working so many hours a week to get paid a consulting fee for, per hour,
right,
as opposed to actually establishing a business where there's different revenue streams coming in, and it's not just what they're doing on a per hour basis. So we have that issue that we deal with too.
What are some of the challenges that you think women face when they get into business that maybe men do not? Is it pretty much the same? I mean, I trust the fact that there is a women's business center suggests that women could use a little extra help, or maybe they have special interests or needs that somebody needs to understand.
Well, I think there are a few differences. Some of the challenges are the same and are universal, but there's a few that are really different. And one is, and we say this about the Women's Business Center, is that we're there for the life of a woman. So when they need to do things and when they need to work on things, may not be like a 9-to-5 type of job. So we actually provide them training in the evenings or on the weekends, or have events when it fits around their lifestyle, because their lifestyle isn't an 8-to-5 or a 7-to-4 or a 9-to-5 type of lifestyle. It's pretty much 24/7. And that's the case with a lot of men too, but there still are issues with childcare that are different from most men. Secondly, there is an issue with access to capital. There's a lot of women out there, it's a glass ceiling to actually get in front of venture capitalists or even angel investors and other financial people to say, hey, here's what my business is, and invest in me. And it's still a glass ceiling. And so one of the things that I was looking at for our community too is to figure out how we can provide some micro-lending programs, because even the angel investors and the venture capitalists, we're talking about really high-tech companies that, even if they're male-owned companies, I don't know what the statistics are, but it's like 1 in 1,000 may get an investment, you know what I'm
Right.
saying? And a lot of the women-owned businesses that we're working with may just need, you know, $1,000 or $4,000 or $10,000 to get something started that they can even just, you know, get that seed money and get
then
started
bootstrap
with.
their way
Yeah.
to success.
So, but the access to capital is a huge issue, and that's why a lot of women's business centers around the country, and I've benchmarked them, that it's something that I want to provide is a way to bring more funding opportunities for those women-owned businesses.
Why do you suppose that is? Why do you suppose that the venture capitalists gravitate maybe more towards men's ideas, or is it something to do with the network that it takes to get there?
I think it's partially the network that it takes to get there, and I do think there's still a confidence issue for women, and more so than men. So the confidence in understanding financial matters, and also just being able to do an elevator pitch and a presentation pitch, I think for a lot of them still lack that confidence. So one of the things how we've addressed that is to start this mentoring program for these businesses and get them the experience and the opportunities to actually be able to do those kinds of things in front of people. And it's interesting, if you read a lot of literature on women starting businesses, those are the two major issues that are preventing them from actually gaining equal access.
Is Brevard County different from other regions, do you think, in that regard? I mean, I've heard that everybody has a difficult time finding the kind of Silicon Valley true venture capitalist around here. Does that just make it twice as hard for women, or are there different avenues you think that local businesses and entrepreneurs should take or think about when it comes to funding their startups or their businesses?
Well, I'm not an expert in it, but you know, for the most part, for people to start their businesses, bootstrapping is really what it's going to take. And what I mean by bootstrapping is, you know, they're going to have to figure out how to use their own money, friends' money, family money, that kind of thing. And that's no different for women versus men.
The classic start it in the garage kind of approach.
Exactly. But what can help with that, though, is what I was talking about, are these micro-lending opportunities where there's different ways to set up funds, and I'm actually starting to research that now. So like I know some women's business centers and maybe some small business development centers, actually there's grants from the government, and I don't know which department it is, but they're called CDFI funds, and they're seed funds that they can use to help, that they can set up within these centers, and they provide financial and technical assistance at small amounts to up to probably 30 to 40,000 is when the banks actually start doing, you know, some of the lending. And that's really for most of the businesses that come in and see us. And I would say if you talk to, you know, Rob Pickett at the Small Business Development Center, is a lot of the same issue for the businesses that come in to see them too. So there's no difference there really between the women and men, I think, for people that are wanting to start those small businesses. But I will say when it comes to access to, you know, those venture capitalists and the angel investors and people that really want to get the help with the technical businesses, they're just not, the women aren't getting able to get in front of them. And I think a lot of it is just, you know, networking issues and knowing the right people and making those acquaintances.
Cultural stuff that can be overcome.
Sure.
What are some of the first steps that you think a woman ought to think about? Well, really anybody, but you know, in terms of, do I start a business? Do I not? What should they're doing soul searching? Should I go for it? Or should I not go for it? Is there anything about a person's personality that you would say, yes, you're perfect, go for it, or maybe you ought to think twice?
It's all the same things that most people talk about, and what I'm going to say is what I hear from the entrepreneurs that we bring in that talk to some of our women and men that where we have these events, and they say, well, what does it take to be an entrepreneur? And there's a few key things I hear from every one of them. One is obviously risk taker. And every single one of them have said that. And then the second one, which I find really interesting, because I think people don't believe it until they actually start their businesses, is the amount of time that they're going to put into it. And I think a lot of people come in with that soul searching, should I start a business, should I not? And they think they're going to work 20 to 40 hours a week on it. And
on the side, maybe?
I guess, yeah. And, you know, people aren't ready to take that leap either. So they're like, well, I'm going to work my job but start this business, but I can only do maybe 5 to 10 hours a week on it. And anybody who I've heard who has been successful in starting a business, if they do have a position they're working in, they're usually spending another 40 hours a week on the side, you know, preparing to get their business started. Yeah,
nights.
I mean, it's their job, it's their life. There really isn't much extra time to do anything other than that. And then the third thing that most people say is it's got to be your passion. You've got to like what you do. And I know a lot of people want to, you know, be entrepreneurs and want to start their business, but they haven't figured out what it is that they really like.
They haven't found the idea. They like the idea.
Right.
They think they could do it, but they don't have something to sell yet.
Right. And it doesn't have to be products. So I think sometimes they have to figure out, and maybe they can work with a personal coach or counselor or whatever that, you know, helps them identify what it is that really makes them feel good.
But you have to have something to sell. You do have
You
to
do
have something on the
You have to have
market.
something. You definitely have to have something.
Hi, I'm an entrepreneur. Hire me.
Yeah, yeah. But nowadays, you know, because of our knowledge-based businesses, it's amazing the different kinds of businesses you can start without having to have the, you know, stereotypical prototype and product and patent and all that kind of stuff.
Great. You mentioned that you were in the international marketing and merchandising world, and you also mentioned that if you have a computer, you know, and you're an internet connection, you're good to go. Should people be thinking nationally, internationally, right out of the chute these days, or should they be looking at, you know, let me sell something to people around here, see if it works first, and then grow up to that point?
Well, I'm very partial to this question because of my international background, but I'm a firm believer that when you're doing your research and developing your business plan and thinking about who your target market is, that you really should think on a global level. And an example of that is I know someone that had worked on a baby bottle, and you know, the market in the U.S. was a pretty sizable market, but if you look at the markets like in South America or China or some of these other places where they're having, what, 2 or 3, maybe not in China, but South America, you know, quite a huge family in these countries, and the average age of the people in that country are in their 20s as opposed to, I don't know what it is here, I think it's like
40-something.
Is it 40-something?
I think it's 40.
Then maybe you should think about starting in those markets. But there's all kinds of things that you need to think about, though, are, you know, the customs regulations and the other government regulations and that kind of thing. But I do know people, I know with Scott Moody with Authentic, when he was here and was running Authentic, they actually started, you know, they found that their customers were in Japan. And so when they started that business, they actually, you know, started doing business development in Japan because that's where their end customers were going to be, and not really in the U.S. So you really, it all depends on the industry you're in, and you know, is it the target market ripe for it, and then the regulations that happen in those countries, and understanding what those rules and regulations are. But I definitely think you shouldn't just say, well, I'm going to start locally and expand from there, because there may be a better opportunity in another market somewhere else.
The baby bottle idea, what happened with that?
He's still working on it, and it's starting to grow, and it's doing really well. So, and I think with his issue is, again, investors. So you can have a great idea, and you may have a good management team, but again, you have to have that luck and fortune and right connections to find the investors to help you out.
I was in Entrepreneur Summit, I think maybe 2 years ago, and I saw a team, and there was a series of pitches of people with products that they're doing, and there was somebody with a baby bottle idea where it was separate, and then you shook it and it mixed up the, you know, you wouldn't have to put down your purse and your diaper bag, and it was a really great idea. Now I'm thinking, if you could put it all in there and sell it to the Chinese people who are afraid to buy their country's own baby formula, it could really have a market.
Exactly.
I'm not sure I'm ready to become an entrepreneur yet, though. I asked you $1 million question at a recent stakeholder summit, and you've talked about micro-lending. If I gave you $1 million to invest somewhere in Brevard County, would it go to that? Would it go into micro-lending, or?
It definitely would, and I can expound a little bit more on micro-lending because I didn't talk about it before.
How would you set something up like that?
Well, that's a good question. I don't have the answer, but in fact, what I said at the summit inspired at least one person in the community who's a banker to say, hey, let's have a conversation about it, because I really believe in this too. So I think, so I wouldn't set it up single-handedly. I would definitely try to partner with people in the community. But I also had mentioned, I think at the summit, about a gentleman named Muhammad Yunus who won the 2006 Nobel Peace Prize and started the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. And it was he did microlending for mostly women. It was all women really in business. And when we talked there, it was like $50 or $100 at a time. But it wasn't just giving out loans and expecting a payback. There was a whole system in place, and I don't know fully enough about it, but I know enough that there was accountability built into it. So not only were they given loans, but they were given technical assistance, and they were told that, well, if you accept this loan, you must meet with your peers, the other women that are receiving these loans on a weekly basis, or maybe it was twice a month basis, whatever that basis is, and have peer-to-peer mentoring and accountability sessions with each other. And so through that experience, they had better success rates, that they achieved like a 99.9% return on those loans. And then, you know, it just expanded exponentially to the point where there's actually Grameen Bank in the United States now, headquartered in New York. And there are some microlending activities going on with them and with other organizations.
Sure.
I just want to research it more because obviously it hasn't gotten down into our communities, and I think it's still happening maybe at more metropolitan areas. But really, the communities that are ripe for it are, you know, mid-level ones like ours, and even, you know, more rural communities where they really need that hands-up, you know, assistance in the microlending. But I see it as a support system, a community support system, and I think it's something that our whole community has to embrace and say they want to do for it to be really successful, I think.
You are connected to, the center is connected to Florida Institute of Technology. Is there, it seems like there's a lot of promise in licensing and setting up people or researchers who make discoveries or develop technologies in the university setting and moving them to market somehow. Is that, one, is your organization involved in that, or and if not, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity, and the Women's Business Center right now is a part of the College of Business, and the College of Business is involved with that endeavor in a lot of different ways. I know, you know, one of the endeavors is they started a master's in science and innovation and entrepreneurship.
Okay.
So it's an MSIE. So I always have to remember what it is. And what it is taking classes in innovation, like, you know, product development, product line management, that kind of thing, and entrepreneurship, business, finance, and molding them together. So it's not just a business student that would get this master's, it may be an engineering student or an IT student. And so the goal is to actually have teams of people from these different disciplines to work together to take an idea and or a you know, patent and commercialize it and bring it to market. So they are starting to work on that at the graduate level, and then from a community level, they tried doing something like that, actually not taking technology from the university, but creating Startup Weekend. And I don't know if you had heard about that, but they did that November 15th, I think was the date, when they had the first Startup Weekend, and that's part of a national organization. And this was the first time for a smaller metropolitan area like ourselves to participate, because usually they have them in Orlando, Seattle, and that kind of thing. So we have Dr. Abe Walton and Dr. Scott Benjamin that are focused on entrepreneurship for the College of Business, and they began this Startup Weekend where it's taking students from the university and anybody from the community that wants to do it, get together, and for 4 hours on a weekend, starting on a Friday and ending on a Sunday, forming teams and people pitching their ideas, and whoever decides they want to go with these ideas, they form teams around them, and they actually try to start businesses within that weekend period. And so, you know, they do their pitches at the end of the day, and they have judging, and the people that win that competition can go on to like state level or, you know, regional level competitions.
Wow.
So they also have those endeavors that are going on, trying to marry what technology and what, you know, research capabilities we have at the university with the people in the community to form that partnership too. So there's a lot of stuff going on that's really exciting.
That's terrific. I think it was Dr. Bob Scaringe I had in for an interview.
He's very involved with the College of Business.
Recently, and he was describing how like MIT has like what graduates like 1,000 students a year, and 10% of them launch their own companies, which is like 100 startups every year coming out of this university. And they may not all succeed, but even if you had 10 succeed, that's a lot of companies that wind up coming out of this technology and everything that you have going on at your university. I think that would be pretty spectacular. We have just a couple of minutes. Tell me a little bit about how you got into business and chose your career path.
I think you've heard Carol Craig say she's the accidental entrepreneur a lot of times with Craig Technologies, and I would say I'm the accidental business person because when I graduated college, I had an Asian Studies degree, but I also had an ROTC scholarship. So I went into the military for 4 years and had a rough assignment, and they sent me to Hawaii. And I worked on my MBA degree while I was in the military because I knew that I really enjoyed my time there, but I knew that I was probably going to get out after 4 years. And then I ended up in this Arkansas. And I was from Pennsylvania originally, so first of all, I was geographically challenged and really didn't know where Arkansas was.
Sure.
And second of all, I said, what am I going to do with Asian Studies master's, a Japanese Studies undergrad, and business experience? Because I wanted to do something international. And lo and behold, Walmart and J.B. Hunt and Tyson were the major companies that were there in Northwest Arkansas. So I ended up working for Walmart for about 9 years in the 90s. And that's where I started my official business career. And it was a wonderful learning experience during that time frame because they were still in really powerful growth mode, and they were a big company thinking like a small company. And I learned a lot of great leadership skills, and as a 20-something managed a $300 million category.
Wow. Yeah.
So I actually learned, I think, a lot of entrepreneurial skills while working there during that time period because they were still in such that high growth mode that bureaucracy hadn't been creeping in yet, and they really gave a lot of responsibility and accountability to the 20 and 30 somethings in the company.
What a great experience! Well, it certainly introduced the concept of the supply chain to us here in the United States. Beth Gitlin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much,
good
Matt.
luck.
I really appreciate it.
Well, that's it for today's program. As always, you can share your feedback or suggestions by sending us an email to letters@floridatoday.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you right here next week on The Matt Reed Show.